Station 51, engine 27, engine 32, truck 105.
You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf.
Welcome back to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative fire control technology. Sounds like fun. I don't know. Check it out on the web, teamwildfire.com. Today, with us, we have all picked up a product, looked at the bottom, and it says UL on it. And we thought, what the heck does that mean? Well, I've got Baylie Scott from UL with us today to explain what UL means and what she's working on. And, you know, obviously, okay, we know it's about keeping us safe from burning our houses down, supposedly, or something like that. I mean, people still figure out how to do it. There's always a workaround. Baylie, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So what are you working on these days?
Yeah, so I am pretty recently at, the Fire Safety Research Institute, which is a division of UL, as you mentioned. And we are building NERIS, which is the new National Fire Data Collection and Analytics System.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, quite a mouthful.
I remember the NERIS part.
That's the most important part.
And I remembered FSRI.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So what exactly do all these initials mean?
Yeah, so the legacy system, which has been around since the 70s, is NFIRS. So that is a FEMA ran and USFA ran program that is how fire departments report incidents and how we've basically always reported incidents. And the last update to NFIRS was in the early 2000s. It is being sort of reimagined and revisioned, which is now going to be NERIS. So we are currently onboarding fire departments across the country based on FEMA region. We started in New York and New Jersey in May, and then we've moved to the South this month, and we're onboarding Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama. Yeah, so that's quite the big swath. And when I was like, why is the South next? And it's very thoughtfully done. We were getting them handled before hurricane season starts. So doing a FEMA region in the South, we wanted to get onto that before hurricane season in the fall. So, which it is starting earlier.
There's a hurricane season?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's starting earlier and earlier, but the fire departments are being onboarded onto the system. They don't have to start reporting yet. That doesn't have to happen until January 1st. NFIRS will sunset at the end of the year, and NERIS will sort of take over as the new standard for data collection for the fire service.
Okay, so you're going by FEMA regions for the onboarding, but it will not be related to FEMA going forward, right?
Well,
this is just...
Yeah, USFA owns the project. It is a USFA project that is going on, and UL FSRI is helping to build it.
Wow. And what happens if they sunset FEMA?
Well, hopefully they won't sunset the U.S. Fire Administration. So
right. No,
NERIS will prevail regardless. So.
And this isn't your first rodeo in fire, is it?
It is not, no. I started my career at the Tennessee State Fire Marshal's office, green out of college. My entire family, like so many other firefighters, is in the fire service. I was always the nerdier of the bunch. So I ended up at the fire marshal's office. I started doing community risk reduction and really have a passion for evidence-based decision making and helping give fire departments the data that they need to make the best decision. And I traveled around the state, going fire department by fire department. And then a little fire happened in 2016 in Gatlinburg. And I was sort of thrown into the fire very quickly. We, during the Gatlinburg wildfire, we were able to use maps to plot out damage and then overlay that. The Tennessee State Fire Marshal's office is under the Department of Commerce and Insurance. So we did an insurance data call, got all the property values and how much was insured, overlaid that over damage reports, and were able to get a FEMA declaration rather quickly using GIS. So that sort of, after that, I was sort of hooked into the data realm. Once you see it in action and see how big of a difference you can make, it becomes pretty addicting. And so I went down that road and then ended up at Esri for about 2.5 years. Had a great time there making some geospatial fire risk solutions, as we call them, and then recently transitioned over to FSRI for the exciting project of NERIS.
Are you working with Anthony over there?
I did work with Anthony, yep. I saw him about a month ago. I still get to cross paths with him occasionally, but he's always a pleasure.
He is. What a great guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, wealth of knowledge too, coming from Wyoming and being a state forester and all that. He was a great person to sort of leverage for making sure that we were building things for the right audience.
Right, and then they'd be able to use it, and it would help them.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm very sensitive to the fact that I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. When you're talking about wildfire and you start talking with the Southern accent, automatically there's a little bit of a stereotype there where it's like, you may not know wildfire. I'm like, well, I know when wildfire becomes structure fire, which is definitely what happened in Gatlinburg, and we're seeing that more and more in the South with the prevalence of wildfire and WUI expanding. So.
Are we seeing that go the other way as well, where structure fires start wildland fires?
You know, that's an interesting point. I don't know that we're able to like classify that well in the existing system. NERIS is going to be interesting in that you can place points and draw polygons around incidents. So we'll be able to better capture the wildfire perimeter, where it starts, how it spreads, and be able to do some really cool analysis based on that.
I see. And do you use satellite imagery as well?
Well, that can certainly be used. So NERIS is being used as with a geographic backbone. So there is a point and polygon for every incident that will exist. NFIRS does not have location-based data right now. So that's sort of revolutionary for the fire service, being able to visualize something on a map. So that data can then be used with whatever satellite imagery you have, with whatever other layers in any other geospatial platform that you have. It's going to be really interoperable, which is awesome.
So the people who have to use this in the fire departments, what does their interface look like?
Yes, they have a few options.
Hose in one hand, a computer in the other.
Hopefully not, right? So not everyone's brain is broken like mine and can speak in NFIRS type codes, which is good for them, very unfortunate for me. But NERIS is built in a plain language model, so the instant typing is more firefighter friendly. I have a 25-year-old brother who's a firefighter, and I always say, like, anything that I'm building or thinking about, I want to make sure that he can use it, right? So, like, if he's coming off the fire ground, how is he going to be able to quickly and easily report what happened in a way that is useful for him, but also useful for his chief, and even above that at the state and federal level? So there's a lot more plain language typing in NERIS. There's also the ability to have multiple hazards in one incident, which I think, speaking of wildfire, is a huge thing. There's a lot of times something that starts out as one thing ends up being multiple things. And just with a structure fire, you can have a structure fire with hazmat, with transport. And right now, logging that is not very clear and how that occurs. But the multiple incident type codes and having one that you can set as primary and then others cascading below that is going to be a really huge deal for the fire service.
So how do you anticipate where wildland firefighters may come across a hazmat situation? I imagine once it jumps to a structure, goes to someone's pool house, now all the chlorine is on fire.
Yeah, I think, that's certainly speaks to the partnerships between local firefighters and a lot of times those wildfire firefighting entities. I think that we've gotten a lot better as time has gone on about integrating those two things, but the lines are continuing to blur and those partnerships are becoming even more important. So whether it's like residential pre-planning that the fire department's doing from a risk perspective, so if they have a pool or if they have some other hazard, having knowledge of that and being able to use that data back and forth. But I also think looking back at historical data is a really important part of that. And how has that the past, how can it inform the future for wildfire, like hazard mitigation?
Yeah. And so are we expecting new fires to behave like old fires? Or...
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so, right? Like the way that we're building things and the way that population is moving, and it's moving more and more rural. I think certainly I'm right outside of Nashville, and we saw this after COVID. Everybody starts moving outside of the city, and that urban sprawl becomes wider and wider. We even had fire departments created out of that because the population has grown in some of these suburbs that didn't have population before. So I think that as we continue to get more and more remote in the way that we're living, I think that the hazards are going to continue to increase as we're living in that wild and urban interface.
And I imagine if people are moving rural rather than suburban or urban,
Right.
then the densities are getting smaller and therefore the response times would get longer.
Exactly. Yeah. And being able, again, that goes back to data, right? So if we need more firefighters, if we need more stations, if we need more engines, that's all got to start from a data first approach, right? If you go to city council, county commission, the first thing they're going to ask is how much money does this cost me? And being
Right.
able to give them the data on this is how much it would cost, but this is going to be the benefit as well is going to be huge.
So it's really comparative costs, right?
Right.
This is what it'll cost to do it, and this is what it's going to cost if you don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, I think that's, we're asking a lot of fire chiefs, but I think we're also asking them to be CEOs to a certain extent. So
What's that?
They're being asked to essentially be a CEO of a fire department,
CEO.
right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They've got to manage a budget. They're doing all this stuff, but as they continue to evolutionize and have more and more responsibilities added to that plate, data is going to become increasingly important to be able to justify and get quick decisions that can be made with evidence backing it up.
So when you have an evidence-based decision, does that always start as data? I mean, for me, most of my good decisions were made on instinct.
Yeah.
Right? And then someone showed me some data. I was like, yeah, maybe it jibes, maybe it doesn't, but I'm going with my gut.
Yeah.
Right. And right, they say, your gut will usually steer you right.
Yeah, there's certainly something to that. I think that when you're having to, if you're in a city council meeting or a county commission meeting and you're up there with 80 other department heads, it feels like all asking for money, certainly having some data to back you up is going to be a big thing. But I do think, especially on the fire ground and more of a suppression aspect, the gut instinct is invaluable, right? We know, but I think what data does a lot of times is just reaffirm what we think is happening. And that was certainly the case when I was with the state fire marshal's office. We would take data from the state to locals, and I don't know their area better than them, of course, but a lot of the times we would say, does this line up? And they're like, yes, that's exactly it. And it's like, now you have the data to show that what you thought was happening is actually happening.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And even if a decision was gut based, that
Right.
still gets put into the data, like, okay, so and so did this for whatever reason, and this was the outcome.
Yeah.
So you should either do this, or maybe you should not do that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Interesting. When they onboarded you at UL,
Mhm.
did you learn anything about the history of UL?
I did, yeah. It's really a fascinating and very, very, very old company. So that's it's really cool to be a part of that and sort of see the Fire Safety Research Institute just continue to expand and grow in the research that we're able to do. There was some research that was done a few weeks back that about on electric vehicles and the way that we're suppressing those. So they're always those new and emerging hazards. They're always being researched and making sure that we're keeping firefighters safe and civilians safe.
Just so we spread the word on what that news was, it basically said that throwing a blanket over an EV contains the heat, accelerates the thermal runaway,
Exactly.
and contains the hydrogen, which then blows up. So maybe not the best thing.
Yeah, you're potentially making a little explosion when you put or a big explosion rather, when you put a blanket on an EV.
Right. And what's the prevalence now on EV fires?
Yeah, that's what we're, so that's one of the reasons that NERIS is so exciting. So we, that data is not easily collected. So NFIRS was last updated in the early 2000s. EVs were not thought about then in the way that they are now, and certainly not from a fire perspective. So there's classifying those fires in NFIRS is difficult. And because of that, we don't know, like from a federal perspective or even a state perspective, what that is, because everybody's doing it a little different. The flexibility of NERIS and the ability to update it quickly is going to be able to capture those emerging hazards much more quickly and easily. For example, electric vehicle fires are one of the topics in there, as well as lithium-ion batteries and some other things as well. But the schema is expandable too. So if we have something like this that occurs, another round of electric vehicle type technology that comes out in 10 years, we can expand the schema to allow for that and better tracking and give firefighters the best data.
Right. So then we'll be able to separate out lithium-ion fires from whatever, iron
Yeah,
oxide fire,
exactly.
whatever. Interesting. Wow. Yeah. One of the things I'd love to know is, when you get an EV fire,
Hmm.
that relative can't really be suppressed, right? You could
Right.
just keep it from catching other things on fire.
Yeah.
What's being released and in what quantities,
Right.
and is it possible that that a few EV fires and the amount of crap they release into the air, you know, is actually worse than X number of combustion engines?
Yeah, it is all very interesting, and I think that there's a lot of research still to be done on that. And as they become even more prevalent, that's going to become an emerging topic for a long time. I have a feeling.
Yeah, it feels kind of like it's just a pollution transfer, maybe not, right? There's still pollution, it's just not happening on our road.
Right. It's just a different type. It's a different type of fire, right? So we're
Yeah.
The way that those burn is different. The way that they off-put gases is different. We have to take all those things into consideration for the emerging hazards.
Have they a friend of mine, Carver Anderson, is developing a fire extinguisher that uses liquid nitrogen and CO2
Interesting.
to basically to drop that battery down to minus 320.
Yeah.
And then no heat, no fire.
Interesting. Yeah. I've heard of a few different unique ways that this is being approached. So I'll be interested to see which one sort of comes out as the leading way of doing it, I guess. Best example.
And then that'll change.
Yeah, exactly.
So you told me, about some of the new things UL's doing. What was the origin of UL? Why was it started, and what was their mission?
Steve, I didn't know I was going to get a pop quiz on my new employer. So they were started as an electrical research institute or electrical company, if I recollect correctly. So there's 3 divisions of UL. There's UL, the company, UL Solutions, and then UL Research Institutes. We are housed under the research part, which gets to
I would have
conduct
guessed
best
that.
practices. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. And UL, but the U is their underwriters, which most people think of as insurance.
Yeah.
So was this originally started to kind of quantify data or set a safety standard for people to not light their houses on fire because the iron didn't work or the radio was miswired or something?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there's a UL stamp on the bottom of a lot of things, electronics, appliances, different things like that. That is a certification that has been tested by a third-party laboratory, which is UL in that case. And you're right, it's setting a standard for making sure that things are being built and constructed to meet safety measures and best practices.
And what other agencies or private entities do you interface with in the course of the work you're doing?
So my work specifically related to NERIS, I'm getting to work a lot with the states. So I come from a state and making sure that the states are empowered. So states use data in a unique way compared to fire departments, but they do use it. And I think both good and bad states have been sort of quiet on the way that they use data and how it's informing policy specifically at the state level. So NERIS is really important to them too. They need the data, but in a different way than a fire chief may need the data. So we're making sure that we're empowering them to do their job as best they can, and while also maintaining this firefighter first mentality of NERIS. So I've been interfacing a lot with state fire marshals' offices, getting to travel to some of them. I was in North Carolina last week and in Louisiana next week, so making my way across the country. But it's really interesting to get to learn about how fire data is being used at the state level and how it's impacting different state legislation, state statutes, how all the different fire marshals' offices are set up a little bit more uniquely than others, and what data they need to do their job best. So that's one of the biggest partnerships that we have right now going is with the state fire marshals. National Association of State Fire Marshals is also great. And they're helping inform some of the state level information products that will come out of NERIS.
So let me ask you, as you travel around and you visit different state fire marshal offices, you don't have to name names here, but what do you pick up as the vibe in these different offices comparatively? Like, is it all the same, or some people are just trying to keep their head above water and some people are really trying to innovate, or what are you picking up there?
Yeah, everybody's different. So there aren't very many that are similar, which is actually sort of fun in that you get to learn how different state governments have been set up. Some fire marshal's offices are housed under the state police, so they most of the members of the fire marshal's office are also commissioned law enforcement officers. Those definitely have more of a enforcement arm than the others that are, say, under the Department of Commerce and Insurance or licensing and regulation. That's sort of the other flavor of fire marshal's offices. In Tennessee, we are under Commerce and Insurance, so we have that insurance lean to some of our regulatory things, but certainly still all of them really care about the fire service and making sure that they're empowering the locals to do the best that they can, which is certainly a passion of mine, and it's shared across all 50 states. I haven't met one who doesn't lead with firefighters first. So,
And as they interact with NERIS, then the data that you collect is all going to be, NERIS format data.
right.
But prior to that, are there issues of siloed data because of a lack of common language and reporting methods?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. So I always, one of my really good friends and colleagues is in South Carolina, and even when I was at the state fire marshal's office, we would have friendly arguments over what a fire death is. So what we classified in Tennessee and sort of put in our data pool of a fire death was different than what South Carolina was. And so when you try to compare numbers, you can't, because they're not the same data sets. Their data set includes car fires, fire deaths, whereas ours did not. And there's arguments both sides of that, and I won't get into it. But that's a good example of like how something simple actually becomes really convoluted pretty quickly, and you can't compare, oh, I have a higher fire death rate than you have, because we're actually looking at two different data pools. So I'm optimistic that everybody being on a same page is good. We're also flexible in adding to the schema, like I said. So if there's something that's shared across states that's needed, there's certainly an appetite to make sure that that need's being fulfilled.
So how do you figure out when they're talking about the same thing or a different thing, but you're using different language? At what point do you realize, oh, these people are actually talking about the same thing? They're just describing it or classifying it differently.
Right. Yeah, there is definitely some of that. And I think everybody's brain being put together as one is going to be a lot better for us in the long run. You're right, there has been some siloed data in the past, but I think this interoperable API-driven system that can be pulled into other things, the data is going to be much faster as well. So in Tennessee, we pulled down data 6 months after the end of the year. So usually June, July, we would pull down the data from the past year from NFIRS. So automatically we're working on data that's at least 6 months old and sometimes 18 months old to make decisions. NERIS data is going to be published in an open data hub. So there will be, FEMA will be able to have that data and be able to publish that for the fire service. That can then be used across systems to help make sure that the data is being refreshed at a frequency that's really quick, and also giving them fast decision-making capability.
So how would firefighters access the data? If they log in there, like, what are they looking at?
Right.
Is this something with an intuitive interface?
Yes.
Do you query the data? Does it just give you bottom line facts? And if I wanted to go in there and play with it,
yeah. So
do I have to have a GIS degree or whatever?
No. So there's a few ways. So the form itself, there's a few ways to report to NERIS. They can continue using their current RMS company, which there's several great RMS companies out there. There's a list on the NERIS website of vendors that have passed that compatibility for the version 1 schema and have ability to write into our API. When that happens, the firefighter actually, they'll see some forms fields change probably, but from the user interface perspective, it's still going to be in their RMS system that they know already.
RMS stands for what?
Records Management System.
Okay.
So their records management system will be very like that is all going to stay the same if that records management system is reporting to NERIS. The fields may change, like I said, but that form should stay the same. There's also a form that's being created or is created and is out there now for direct reporting into NERIS. So it is a survey-based form, so very similar to what we're used to filling out online or on our phone. It is mobile ready, so they can do it from their phone. And that has gotten a lot of good feedback from firefighters because it's a lot more intuitive than the NFIRS report. To access the data once it's in there, there's a few options. Every fire department will have their own node, which has insights in there. So they'll be able to see any incidents they're reporting and be given different things. That's going to be built on and expanded pretty rapidly. We're working on that now, and that's the exciting thing for me. I love data visualization stuff. But then it's also, we're going to have an external data hub will be from the U.S. Fire Administration. That data will live in ArcGIS Online as a published feature service. So if they want to pull that into a dashboard or a map, they're able to do that pretty quickly and easily.
So if I wanted to create a map of the movement of wildfire
Right.
Over time,
Yeah.
and watch, areas that hadn't previously been
Right.
fire areas. When I, went up the road from you to Knoxville, and
Yeah.
they were talking about different, wildland fire
Mhm.
solutions. They said, well, that's not really a thing around here.
Yeah.
And so what I wondered is, are they thinking that it's going to be a thing and they
Yeah.
should start getting ready for it? Or are they just thinking that doesn't happen here and we'll worry about it if it does?
Yeah, I think that there were a lot of lessons learned in Tennessee specifically after the Gatlinburg fire, because even me being from here, I would have said that before that fire probably. That's a Western problem. I feel like there's a lot of that connotation for the South. We're learning very quickly that that's not the case, especially in Appalachia. As people are moving up into those beautiful mountains, we're interacting with the WUI, right? Like you're building in the wildland. In a lot of cases, getting to those areas is difficult, but they're also protected by municipal fire departments in a lot of cases that don't have wildland capabilities because the data hasn't been there that it's a need. So I think having the data that shows when wildfires are happening, where they're happening, the prevalence of them. The South has a lot of wildfires. They just don't spread the way that the ones in the West do. They interact differently. But I expect that will change as people continue to get more rural.
Yeah. And as the municipal departments get more fire,
Right.
What kind of changes will they have to make? This will be additional training, or are they going to be recruiting and hiring people with different specialties, or how does that impact them at that local level?
Yeah, I think going back to the Gatlinburg fire, one of the interesting lessons that I learned is we have a lot of volunteer fire departments that were responding in gear that was outdated per NFPA because that's all they have, and that's understandable. But not only were they not in wildland firefighting gear, they're in structural suppression uniforms, and then those are not even compliant anymore with the standards. So I think that getting resources is going to be a huge thing. So, but again, how do you get resources? You have to validate that they're actually a need, right? So
Right.
Having data to back up those requests is going to be big. I also think that wildland suppression apparatus, even whether it's a brush truck, being able to have those things, especially in the more rural areas, is going to be really important.
So every wildland firefighter carries an 8-pound folded up shelter.
Right.
Right. How often are those deployed?
I don't know. I would say probably not very frequently, I would hope. But yeah, I don't. Do we know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious because 8 pounds is a lot of.
It is.
There's a lot of weight to carry around when you're huffing 6,000 calories an hour in a chainsaw.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if it's only used, in 0.0006% of the time, then you might say, maybe the effort's not worth the. What do they say? The squeeze. The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a very good point. Yeah. I would again be interested on any data that's backed on that, like how often are they being deployed versus like how many miles are they walking with that much weight. That'd be an interesting little research study.
Right, maybe slow them down when they're running away.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, making a tactically evasive maneuver.
Yeah,
right.
Running
Right.
away, the more plain language version of tactically evasive. Yeah,
Right,
Yep.
Adding distance between you and the threat.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So what do you think is the future of what you're doing? Like you'll put together this NERIS project. I'm guessing it'll require some type of ongoing maintenance.
It'll require what? Sorry.
Some type of ongoing maintenance and improvements as you go. But at which point it might be a management type project versus an innovation project, which is the part that seems to excite you more.
Yeah, I think that it'll always be an innovation project because the fire service is so fastly adapting. The types of calls that they're being asked to respond to and the types of things that they're having to handle just continues to grow. So I expect that it will continue to be an innovation project. There is versioning of NERIS, which is exciting. The versioning on NFIRS was a little bit different than what we're used to now in like a more cloud-based environment that the world is living in. So it's exciting to be a part of that. But yeah, I don't expect the innovation part of anything to go away anytime soon. I'm hoping that never happens and that the system continues to adapt as the fire service adapts.
So is that something that you would want to stay a part of, or are there other aspects of fire data out there that you would like to be part of your future?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about NERIS is that it once we have some data, we'll be able to do some stuff with it, right? So we're building out modules right now, secondary schemas to the base module of NERIS, which includes a community risk reduction module. So we're going to be able to capture proactive data as well as responsive data. So that's sort of a culture shift for the fire service. Hey, I'm needing to mitigate and prevent rather than react. Right. We want them reactive. They're very good at being reactive. We want to maintain that, but there's also a proactive and preventative approach to take to things. So that I think that's going to be really exciting. Where are fires happening? Who are they happening to disproportionately, and how can we help mitigate those and prevent them? But yeah, the NERIS project, I don't expect it to get boring anytime soon. I fully expect for my attention to be wrapped up in it for a long time.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
The last question I had was with regard to mitigation that you brought up. There seems to be either a lack of data or a lack of communication of that data about the actual numerical risks associated with properties, if they take certain mitigation measures or if they don't, with the problem being that people are saying, well, if I'm doing this mitigation, I'm lowering my risk, why aren't my premiums coming down?
Right.
And insurance companies seem to be slow to link mitigation activity with things that could actually result in either a rate reduction or, a non-escalation of rates.
Right.
So I think a lot of homeowners are saying, well, why should I go to this trouble? I've got my family photos backed up on the cloud.
Right.
Right. If I'm doing this work to lower their risk, why don't I get to share in that reward?
Yeah, I definitely think there's more of a push for those proactive measures that are being taken to be taken into account holistically from the fire service. So not just from an insurance perspective, but from a risk perspective for the fire service. So there are some fire departments I know. I did a little bit of work with CWPPs before leaving Esri, worked with Anthony quite a bit on that project. The interesting thing about CWPPs is that they're not standardized in any way. So what they have to have in them and the outcomes of those is vastly different, and it's up to the AHJ to sort of determine that. The negative part of that is when you're evaluating mitigation effectiveness, you're comparing apples to oranges again, right? Because we don't have some sort of standardized way that we're looking at things. I think that as we start to standardize data sets, as we're looking at the same thing, that's going to become more clear as to what the actual monetary value of mitigation is. It's the same, and just like with wildfire, it's the same thing with structure fire. So how much value does a smoke alarm installed in a high-risk area have versus a smoke alarm installed in a low-risk area, right? So there's money attached to all of these things from an insurance perspective, but there's also important mitigation things that are attached to it from a suppression perspective too, right? So how are we mitigating the fire before it becomes a fully involved house fire where people are entrapped, right? So
Right.
I feel like there's a culture shift to a more mitigative, prevention focused approach, both in wildfire and structure fire, but time will tell on that.
It will, and when it does, you'll be there to record it
Yeah, I'm
and share the data.
the data person. Yep.
Really fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating work that you're doing. So I understand why it's so exciting for you.
Yeah.
Why you-
It is extremely exciting. Yeah. My dad's a fire chief, and I have siblings and in-laws that are both firefighters. And so it is cool to sort of see what we're doing and how the landscape's changing from the data perspective impact each of them in different ways. And at the state level as well, and be giving them more data and more power to make decisions.
and it's super cool that being in a firefighter family,
Mhm.
like you get to be, essentially a firefighter, right? On the data side, you're working to make things safer from fire, but you're able to. But the field has expanded so much, that you're able to do exactly what you want to do, and it's completely aligned with fire safety.
Right. Yeah. They remind me frequently that I'm not a firefighter, so I do not want to take that clout by any stretch. However, the data part is and the policy part is becoming more and more of a part of their day-to-day life. Even the line firefighter, who's dealing with that from a managerial standpoint at the fire station. This is impacting everybody a little more than it used to, so it is exciting to be a part of it.
Great. Well, thank you, Baylie.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking time out of your morning
Yeah. Thank you,
to
Steve.
chat with our listeners here.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Yeah, and Baylie Scott, working at UL and FSRI,
Yeah.
and a host of other initials, but
Yeah.
really all about getting the data together to make good decisions and
Right.
support them so people can get the funding and make smart decisions.
Exactly.
Well, whether they make smart decisions with the data is a whole other topic,
It
but
is.
at least Bailey's working to try to get the data to them